The ship Silver Dawn moved across the dark space like a lonely bird far from home. Inside the ship, the people lived and worked with strong discipline. They were trained soldiers ready to fight in every battle. Their leader was Commander Grant, a man with a hard voice and sharper eyes. When he spoke, the others stood stiff and silent. They obeyed him because he never showed fear. Among the crew was Leah Porter. She was not like the others. She was quiet and often nervous. Her eyes searched every corner as if danger waited in the walls. She walked slow, her hands shaking when the lights flickered. The crew noticed her behavior, and they laughed often. Some of the men called her Mouse. Others whispered that she should not have been chosen to serve. At night, when the ship was quiet, Leah sat in her bunk and held her blanket tight. She remembered the old records she had read back on Earth. She worked once in the great archives under the capital city. Many people thought these dusty records were stories, not truth. To Leah, they felt real. The pages spoke about dark hunters that once followed humans in forgotten wars. The stories said these hunters moved without sound and waited for fear before they struck. No one else believed. But Leah believed. She carried that fear every day like a heavy stone. One evening, the soldiers shared food in the hall. Jokes filled the room and laughter was loud. Leah sat at the far end of the table and ate in silence. Her hands shook when a tray dropped and made a sharp sound. The men laughed at her. A young soldier named Scott shouted that Leah was more dangerous to herself than to any enemy. The hall filled with more loud jokes. Leah looked down and did not respond. She felt her face burn, but she stayed quiet. After the meal, she walked alone through the halls of the ship. The air was still. The engines hummed like a steady heart. Leah could not rest. She felt something wrong in the silence. Her steps slowed each time the lights flickered above her head. To the others, this was nothing, but to her it was warning. She placed her hand against the cold wall and closed her eyes. She tried to tell herself that she was safe. Still, the feeling grew inside her chest. Later, she joined Commander Grant and reported her fear. She spoke with care and said something was near the ship. She could not see it, but she knew. Grant stared at her with cold eyes. He stood tall before her, and the rest of the crew watched. His voice was sharp when he replied. He told the others that fear like hers spreads faster than fire. He told them no enemy was present, and Leah was weak-minded. The crew laughed again. Leah lowered her head and left the room without another word. That night, the noise began. The ship shivered with a hollow sound as if something pressed against the outside walls. The crew woke and hurried to their posts. Many thought it was only a problem with the hull. Grant gave commands with steady voice, and the men obeyed. Leah stood apart, her chest tight, her hands cold. She knew the sound was not a broken machine. She knew the danger had come. Her fear was not her weakness. It was her warning. The crew still laughed at her in whispers as they prepared their rifles. They did not believe. She stood in the corner with wide eyes as the sound grew louder and more real. Somewhere beyond the steel walls of the Silver Dawn, something waited and listened. Leah clenched her fists and pressed her back against the wall. For the first time, she was sure of one thing. Her fear was right. The danger was already here. The sound along the walls of the Silver Dawn grew louder with every passing moment. It was not the sound of broken metal or bad engines. It was heavy, steady, and sharp, like something alive moving against steel. The crew stood ready with rifles in their hands. Their faces were hard and cold, but their eyes showed a small fear they tried to hide. Commander Grant ordered the men to check every hall. His voice was strong, and he did not allow a single soldier to stand still. Leah stayed in the corner, her arms closed against her chest. She wanted to speak again, to tell them all that the sound meant more than steel pushing against steel. Yet she stopped herself because she knew they would laugh once more. She remembered the meal hall when they mocked her as Mouse. The sound did not stop. It grew into a soft rhythm like breath sliding through the walls of the ship. 3 teams of soldiers spread across the lower decks with rifles raised. Scott, the young soldier who had mocked Leah earlier, walked in front of his group with a proud smile. He whispered to the others that Leah must be hiding under her bed from the noise. The men laughed to make their hearts lighter, but they gripped their rifles tighter than before. The air grew colder, and their boots echoed across the metal floor. Suddenly, one of them stopped. He turned his head as if he had heard a whisper. The others told him to move, but he lifted his hand slowly and pointed toward the ceiling. A long mark ran across the steel above them, fresh and deep. It stretched from one end of the hall to the other. Their laughter ended. Every man stared in silence as more sounds filled the air. Something was moving swiftly above them. Before they could fire, the lights went out. The ship fell into complete darkness. Screams filled the deep halls. Rifles fired bright sparks that cut the dark for only a short second. The men shouted orders over one another, while someone cried out that one of their team had vanished. The sound of boots running shook the floor. Leah pressed her back hard against the wall of the control deck. She heard the rifles below and the sudden silence after. She wanted to close her ears, but she could not. The room filled with small groups of soldiers rushing back from the lower decks. Their faces were pale. Some had blood on their uniforms, though no one carried the wounds of blades or bullets. Commander Grant grabbed one soldier by his shoulders and demanded the report. The soldier could not speak. His voice cracked with fear as he tried to explain how something tore through his team in the dark. Grant tried to calm them, shouting for order, but the fear could not be hidden now. Even the strongest of men were afraid. Leah walked forward with shaky legs. She told Grant once more that the sound and the fear were real warnings. She said that something hunted them, and that it was not just metal tearing, but a will that lived in the dark. Grant turned on her with anger and refused her words. He ordered a new search and threatened every man who would fall back. But behind his strong voice, Leah saw doubt in his eyes. The ship lights blinked once, and then came back. The hall looked normal again, but the air was heavy, as if smoke of fear pressed into it. From the far end of the hall came a sharp scrape, then silence. Every rifle lifted in the same second. Then Leah heard a voice. It did not come from her left or her right. It moved in her ear, as if spoken within her mind. The sound was low and cold, but clear. It said a single word, Ember. She froze at once. No one had ever called her by that name. No one even knew it. She could not breathe as the sound filled her chest and burned. As she looked around at the others, but none of them reacted. They had heard nothing. Leah knew it had spoken only to her. She pressed her hand against her heart where the sound still rang. The world seemed far away, and the ship faded from her vision. She knew then that her fear had never been weakness. Her fear had drawn it closer. It knew her, and it had given her a name that she did not understand but felt deep like fire waiting to rise. Leah stood frozen in the hall. Her body shook as the word Ember rang in her mind again. It was not her voice, and it was not a human voice from the men around her. It was a whisper that bent close to her ear, though no lips were near. She swallowed hard and touched the wall beside her. The steel burned under her palm as if the name itself carried heat. Commander Grant did not notice her state. He ordered the teams to divide again and check every level of the ship. His voice was loud and sharp, but his hands shook when he held his pistol. He tried to hide his fear by speaking harder and faster, yet every soldier saw his unease. Scott, who still mocked Leah in small words, pointed at her and laughed. He said the noise had probably broken her mind, told the others she looked like she had seen a ghost. But no one laughed with him this time. The faces of the men were drawn and pale. Their nerves hung on a thin string. Each shadow looked dangerous now. Silence between the sounds felt heavier than any attack. Leah's lips moved, though her voice was soft. She whispered to herself again and again, Ember. Each time she spoke it, she felt the sound grow stronger inside her. It was fire behind her ribs. Warm at first, then hot. Her fear should have made her small, but now she stood straighter. Her eyes shined in the hard light of the ship lamps. One soldier named Daniel saw her change. He stepped back and muttered that something in her was not right. His words spread quickly through the group. They surrounded her with rifles and uneasy hands. Commander Grant barked at them to hold steady, but he stared too. He could not hide his confusion. Leah raised her head and looked at him. She said in a clear voice that she now understood why she had feared so deeply. She told him fear was never weakness. Fear was the alarm that woke her body. Fear prepared her for this moment. She said the thing that whispered her name had hunted their kind for years, and that it had chosen her for a reason buried in her bloodline. The commander's jaw tightened. He called her words nonsense. Yet when she stepped closer, The strength in her eyes made even him take a small step back. The crew who used to laugh at her no longer spoke. They felt power in her gaze, though they would not admit it with words. Suddenly, a loud crash shook the lower deck. The metal screamed and the floor shifted under their feet. A group of soldiers ran down the stairs to check the noise. Their boots hammered on the steps. Then silence. Not one sound came back. The hall above was frozen. Grant cursed and ordered more men to follow. Leah placed her hand out to stop them. Her voice shook but carried command. She told them not to go. She said the hunter was testing them one group at a time. She told them to stay together or be lost one by one. Scott laughed once more, though it sounded thin. He said Leah wanted to be the leader now. He called her Ember, like the whisper had. But when he said the name, his own voice cracked, even mocking. The name felt heavy on his tongue. He lowered his eyes quickly as if the sound might punish him. The hall grew still again. Leah felt the fire rolling inside her chest. For the first time, it did not choke her. It made her strong. She looked straight into the shadows where the whisper had come from. Her voice rang out clear. She said if it had chosen her, then she would face it. The crew drew back as she stepped forward alone. The ship seemed to groan at her words. The lights flashed as if the wiring burned with her fire. Grant opened his mouth to stop her, but no order came. He too felt the weight of the moment. Leah now walked without a tremble. The girl they mocked was gone. In her place stood the flame that the hunter had named. Leah walked forward while the crew stood frozen behind her. The sound of her boots echoed heavy across the steel floor. Each step carried more strength while the fire inside her chest burned brighter. The whisper of Ember had not left her. It filled her ears like a steady flame that refused to die. The soldiers stared at her back with wide eyes. They had mocked her weakness for many days, but now they could not explain what they were seeing. Her shoulders, once bent with fear, now stood firm. Her head, once bowed low, now lifted high. Even the air around her seemed too warm. Commander Grant tried to take control. He shouted orders and held his pistol high. He told his men that no soldier would act without his command. Yet his voice lacked power. The men did not move forward. Their eyes no longer followed him. He followed Leah as she walked into the dark. From deep below the ship, another crash rang out, and a scream cut short followed. This time no one laughed or mocked. Fear rolled across every face. Some gripped their rifles so hard their knuckles turned white. The crash ended and silence returned again. Silence was worse because it felt like breath held back before a strike. Leah stopped in the middle of the wide hall. She closed her eyes and listened. A faint scrape crawled along the ceiling. It came closer, slow and careful, like a hunter circling its prey. Leah opened her eyes and raised her hand. She spoke with a strength she did not know she held. She told the men behind her that they would not break into groups any longer. She told them they would stand together and face the darkness here. Grant barked at her, telling her she had no right to command, but no soldier moved toward him. Their loyalty had already shifted without a word. They trusted the one who carried fear not as shame, but as shield. The lights above flickered and went out again. Darkness swallowed the hall. The crew raised rifles, some shaking, waiting for command. Leah did not raise a weapon. She stood tall, the fire inside her chest glowing like a second heartbeat. A shape moved against the dark, strong and fast. Screams filled the air as shadows rushed between the soldiers. Rifles fired, sparks blazing and dying in the blink of an eye. The men tried to form a line, but the blows came from every side. One soldier fell, his weapon sliding across the floor. Another cried out for help, then went silent. Leah heard the whisper again. Ember, closer this time, louder, hot like burning iron in her ear. She spread her hands as if to push the sound away, but instead of leaving, it burst from her. Heat poured from her body. A wave of flame raced across the hall, bright and alive. The soldiers dropped back in shock, covering their faces from the sudden fire. The dark retreated from the glow. The scraping sound above turned sharp like a hiss against the light. They could not see the full form of the hunter in the fire, but they saw the shadow draw away, afraid of her flame. Leah stood at the center with her arms burning bright. Her fear had unfolded into power at last. She shouted that the fire was not curse but gift. She told the crew that their strongest weapon was not steel or rifles, but the spirit of a human who refused to bow. Her voice carried across the hall, strong and certain. The soldiers around her lifted their rifles again, this time with purpose. Daniel, who had doubted her, now raised his voice beside hers and promised he would not fall back. Even Scott, who mocked her often, stood near her with his jaw set hard. Grant stared at her in silence. For years he had believed he was the only power the crew followed. Now he saw flames in her eyes and knew he had lost command. What he saw was not just a girl with trembling hands. He saw a queen rising out of fire, shaping herself in the middle of battle. The scrape in the walls returned. The enemy had not gone, only retreated. Leah's fire lit the way ahead. She clenched her fists and faced the shadows without fear. The fight was not over. It had only begun. The hall burned with red light as Leah stood with fire glowing around her. The soldiers no longer saw her as the weak girl they mocked. They saw a leader who carried fear like a torch and turned it into strength. Her arms lifted high as heat rolled through the air. The steel walls shined bright from the flames that hung around her body without burning her flesh. Commander Grant stared at her in disbelief. His pistol hung by his side as his commands died on his lips. For the first time he understood she was not simply a soldier. She was something more. The enemy feared her fire and the crew now looked to her for guidance. He stepped back and gave no order. The command he once owned had already passed to her. From the shadows, the scrape of claws rang again. The soldiers turned fast, with rifles ready. Their eyes searched the ceiling and the far ends of the hall. Leah raised her hand to stop them from firing. She told them the enemy wanted them broken and scattered. She told them to wait. Her voice held power, and they obeyed without question. The whisper filled her ear again. Ember. It was clear and close. This time she did not shiver when she heard it. She answered the voice out loud. She called herself Ember. Her words carried like fire down the hall. The enemy in the dark replied with a roar that shook the floor. Then the attack came. The shadow rushed forward, faster than any bullet. The soldiers fired in every direction, but their shots passed through the blur. Leah stood firm and drew her fire high into the air. She brought both hands down, and flames spread like a river across the steel ground. The fire formed a circle around the soldiers, and none of it touched them. The heat grew stronger, and their eyes filled with new courage. The shadow struck against the flames and screamed in fury. It tried to push through, but every strike melted back in pain. Sparks showered from the ceiling as the fire fought to hold the line. Leah shouted for the men to aim together. They lined rifles and fired at the center, where the shadow writhed against her fire. Shot after shot rang out until the hall thundered like a drum. Leah drew the fire tighter and lifted it at once. Blaze rose high into the ceiling, trapping the shadow within. She closed her eyes and spoke the name she had been given. She said she was Ember, and she was born of fire, to protect her people. With those words, the fire struck down like a hammer. The shadow gave one last scream, and then was gone. Only smoke and ashes lay on the steel floor. The fire slowly dimmed, and the hall returned to its dull light. The soldiers lowered their rifles. Their chests rose with heavy breaths, but their eyes looked brighter than before. They had seen not only survival, but victory. They gathered around Leah. None mocked her now, and he bowed their heads in respect. Commander Grant stepped forward. His voice shook, but his words were clear. He called her their queen. He said no crown of gold was needed, for her crown was the flame that burned in every strike. Daniel raised his rifle high in honor. The others copied him until the hall echoed with voices calling her Ember. She did not smile, but strength filled her like never before. She looked at each man and woman and told them they had fought as one and would fight as one again if darkness ever returned. She told them their fire together would keep humanity safe. The ship's silver dawn moved forward again into the endless dark of space. Yet those who lived that night no longer feared the shadows outside. They carried the memory of Ember, the queen born from fire, the woman who turned fear into power. Leah Porter, once mocked for her trembling hands, now walked as Ember, leader, and flame. She had faced the whisper, answered it, and risen higher than anyone thought possible. The soldiers who once laughed now followed. The dark no longer ruled. Fire had taken its place.